The storm came without warning that night, and Marcus Cole stood at his kitchen window, watching the sky tear itself apart with lightning and thunder that shook the old farmhouse to its bones. He was 42 years old and tired in ways that sleep could never fix, a man who had inherited nothing from his father except debt and dry soil, and a barn that was older than anyone could remember. The farm had been in his family for 3 generations, but Marcus knew he would be the last Cole to work this land because the bank was coming for everything in 60 days, and there was nothing left to sell. His wife had left him 5 years ago, taking their daughter to California where the sun always shined and farmers did not exist, and Marcus had not blamed her because who would choose this life if they had any other option? He poured himself a glass of whiskey and watched the rain hammer against the glass, thinking about his father and his grandfather and all the men who had broken their backs on this same piece of earth. The lightning flashed again, and Marcus saw something strange through the window, something that made him set down his glass and lean closer to the cold glass. The barn was sinking, not falling over or collapsing from the wind, but actually sinking into the ground as if the earth itself was swallowing it whole, and Marcus grabbed his coat and his flashlight and ran out into the storm without thinking. The rain hit him like a wall of ice, and the mud grabbed at his boots as he ran toward the barn, and by the time he reached it, he was soaked through to his skin and shivering. Half of the barn floor had collapsed into a hole that went down into darkness, a hole so deep that his flashlight beam could not find the bottom, and Marcus stood at the edge breathing hard and trying to understand what he was seeing. This was not a normal sinkhole because the edges were too clean and too smooth, almost like something had been waiting beneath the surface all along and had finally decided to reveal itself. He should have called someone, the police or the fire department or anyone with more sense than a broke farmer standing alone in a storm, but something pulled at him from that darkness below. It was not a voice, and it was not a sound, but more like a feeling in his chest that said he needed to go down there and see what was waiting for him. Marcus found a rope in what remained of the barn and tied it to a support beam that still stood strong, and then he did something that made no sense at all. He climbed down into the hole. The descent took longer than he expected, and his arms burned with the effort of lowering himself hand over hand into the black. But eventually, his boots touched something solid, and he let go of the rope. His flashlight revealed stairs, actual carved stairs that spiraled downward into the earth, and they were made of a stone that Marcus had never seen before, smooth and dark with veins of silver running through it like frozen lightning. These stairs were old, older than America and older than any civilization that should have been building things beneath the plains of Kansas, and Marcus knew that he should climb back up and pretend he never saw any of this. But he did not climb back up. He walked down those stairs for what felt like hours, going deeper and deeper beneath the world he knew, and the air grew warmer as he descended until he was no longer cold from the rain. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a cavern so large that his flashlight could not reach the walls or the ceiling, a space that should not exist beneath a Kansas farm, and in the center of that impossible cavern sat something that stopped his heart. It was a ship. Not a boat or a plane, but an actual ship meant for the stars, sleek and black and shaped like a teardrop lying on its side, and it was bigger than his barn and his house put together. Marcus walked toward it without meaning to, his feet carrying him across the stone floor as if they knew where they needed to go, and when he reached the ship he did something he could not explain. He reached out and touched the hull. The metal was warm beneath his fingers and smooth like glass, and the moment his skin made contact with the surface the ship woke up. Lights cascaded across the hull in patterns that reminded him of breathing, soft blues and whites that pulsed like a heartbeat coming back to life, and Marcus stumbled backward in fear. Then the voice came, not through his ears but directly into his mind, feminine and ancient and filled with something that sounded almost like relief. Genetic signature confirmed. Welcome home, pilot. I have waited so long for you to find me. Marcus fell to his knees on the stone floor and pressed his hands against his temples because the voice was inside his head, and that was not possible. Who are you? He said out loud, his voice echoing in the vast cavern. What is this place? I am Varath 7, the voice replied, and it was gentler now as if the ship understood his fear. I am a vessel of the architects, built 10,000 years before your people learned to plant seeds, and I have been sleeping beneath this land waiting for someone with your blood to wake me. Marcus laughed then, a broken sound that bounced off the distant walls, because this had to be a dream or a hallucination or the beginning of madness. My blood, he said, I am just a farmer, I am nobody. You are exactly who you were meant to be, Varath 7 said. The architects chose your bloodline before your species had a name, before your ancestors climbed down from the trees, and they knew that one day you would stand here in this moment and make a choice. What choice? Marcus asked, still on his knees, still shaking. To save your world, the ship answered, or to watch it burn. The lights on the hull pulsed brighter, and a door opened in the side of the ship, revealing a soft glow from within, an invitation and a challenge all wrapped together. Marcus Cole, the farmer who had lost everything, stood up on shaking legs and looked at the doorway that would change the future of humanity forever. He took a breath, and he walked inside. The inside of the ship was nothing like Marcus had expected, and everything he saw made him question whether he was still awake or lost in some fever dream brought on by the storm. The walls glowed with soft light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and the air smelled clean and fresh like a mountain morning after rain, impossible for a ship that had been buried underground for thousands of years. He walked down a corridor that curved gently ahead of him, and the floor beneath his boots was warm and slightly soft, as if the ship itself was alive and breathing. Do not be afraid, Varath 7 said inside his mind. I know this is strange for you. I know your people have not yet reached the stars, but you were born for this moment, Marcus Cole. How do you know my name? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I have been watching your bloodline for 10,000 years, the ship replied, waiting for one of you to find me, waiting for the genetic key that unlocks my systems, and that key lives in your cells and in your bones. Marcus entered a large circular room at the heart of the ship, and in the center stood a chair that looked like it was grown rather than built, smooth curves of the same dark metal that formed the hull. The walls came alive with images, and Marcus stopped breathing for a moment as he saw things that no human had ever seen before. He saw the galaxy spread out like a jewel box filled with stars, and he saw worlds of every color and size, some covered in water and some wrapped in clouds, and some burning with eternal fire. He saw cities that touched the clouds on 100 different planets, and he saw creatures that walked on 2 legs and 4 legs and no legs at all, beings of light and shadow and crystal and flesh. These are the architects, Varath 7 explained as the images shifted to show 12 different species standing together in what looked like a great hall. They were the first to reach the stars in this part of the galaxy, and they spent 1,000,000 years building an alliance of peace and knowledge. Marcus saw insectoid creatures with glittering shells, standing beside flowing beings that seemed to be made of living water, and there were giants of stone and metal next to small furry things with enormous eyes. They created wonders beyond your imagination, the ship continued. They solved the mysteries of time and space. They learned to fold the universe and travel between stars in the blink of an eye, and they believed that their civilization would last forever. The images changed again, and Marcus felt a chill run through him despite the warmth of the ship. He saw darkness, but not the darkness of space or shadow, something worse, something that moved and hungered and consumed everything it touched. This is the hollow, Varath 7 said. And even the ship's voice carried something like fear. It comes from between dimensions, from the spaces where nothing should exist, and it feeds on consciousness itself, on the minds of thinking beings. Marcus watched in horror as the darkness swept across worlds and left nothing behind. Not death, but emptiness. Entire civilizations erased as if they had never existed at all. The architects fought the Hollow for 1,000 years. Varath 7 explained. They used every weapon they could create and every strategy they could imagine. But the Hollow could not be destroyed because it was not truly alive in any way the architects understood. What happened to them? Marcus asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. They fell, the ship said simply. One by one the great worlds went silent, the alliance crumbled, and the architects faced extinction. But before the end they created one final hope. The images showed Earth now, young and wild, and covered in forests that stretched from pole to pole. And Marcus saw creatures he recognized from museum exhibits, early humans with simple tools and fire. Your species was designed, Varath 7 said. The architects took the genetic material of a promising primate and enhanced it, gave it intelligence and adaptability and something else, something no other species in the galaxy possessed. What? Marcus breathed. Stubbornness, the ship replied, and there was something almost like admiration in the voice. The architects were wise and powerful, but they were not fighters by nature. They preferred peace and negotiation and careful planning. And when the Hollow came, they did not know how to simply refuse to die. Marcus thought about his own life, about all the times he should have given up but did not, about his father who had worked the farm until his heart gave out, and his grandfather who had survived the Dust Bowl through nothing but pure refusal to quit. They made humans to be survivors, Varath 7 continued, to be creatures who would fight when logic said to surrender, who would find hope when there was none, who would get back up no matter how many times they were knocked down. And then they buried you here, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn, waiting for one of us to find you. Yes, the ship confirmed. I was hidden beneath this land with instructions to wait, to sleep, until someone with the genetic key touched my hull and woke me from my long rest. But why me? Marcus asked. Why now? The walls showed the galaxy again, but this time Marcus could see patches of darkness spreading like a disease, swallowing stars and leaving nothing behind. Because the Hollow has returned, Varath 7 said. It has been growing in strength for the last 500 years, consuming the descendants of those few species who survived the First War, and soon it will turn its attention to the edge of the galaxy. To Earth, Marcus whispered. To Earth, the ship agreed. Your world has perhaps 50 years before the Hollow arrives, 50 years to prepare for an enemy that destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Marcus sank into the chair at the center of the room without meaning to, and he felt the ship connect with his mind more deeply, showing him everything at once, the hope and the horror and the impossible task that lay before him. I am just one man, he said. I cannot save the world. No, Varath 7 agreed, but you can wake your people to the truth. You can teach them that they are not alone in the universe, and you can give them the knowledge they need to fight. And what if they are not ready? Marcus asked. What if humans are not what the architects believed we could be? The ship was silent for a long moment, and when it spoke again there was something warm in its voice, something almost like faith. I have watched your species for 10,000 years, Marcus Cole. I have seen you survive ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended you, and every single time you were knocked down you got back up again. That is not a guarantee, Marcus said. No, Varath 7 admitted. It is not a guarantee, it is something better, it is a pattern, and I believe that pattern will hold. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about his farm, his empty house, his life that had seemed so meaningless just a few hours ago. Then he opened his eyes and made his choice. Tell me what I need to do. The first month nearly killed him, and Marcus lost count of how many times he woke up on the floor of the ship, with blood dripping from his nose and his head screaming with pain. Learning to pilot Verath 7 was not like learning to drive a car or fly a plane, because the ship did not have controls in any way that made sense. Instead, it required Marcus to merge his mind with the ship itself and become something more than human. "You must relax," Verath 7 told him again and again. "You must let your consciousness expand into my systems without fighting it." But Marcus did not know how to relax. He had never known how to relax, and his mind kept slamming against the walls of the connection like a wild animal trapped in a cage. The architects had trained their pilots from childhood, slowly building neural pathways that could handle the immense flow of information. But Marcus was a grown man with a brain that had never been prepared for any of this. He suffered seizures that left him shaking on the floor for hours, and he had headaches so bad that he could not see or think or remember his own name. And there were times when he forgot where he was and believed he was still on his farm waiting for the bank to take everything away. "You must rest," the ship urged him after he collapsed for the 15th time in a single day. "If you push too hard, you will destroy your mind beyond repair." "I do not have time to rest," Marcus growled through clenched teeth. "You said the Hollow is coming. You said humanity has 50 years, and I am not going to waste a single day." "You cannot save anyone if you are dead," Verath 7 pointed out. "Then I will not die," Marcus replied, and he pulled himself back to his feet and tried again. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, and slowly something began to change inside Marcus Cole. The connections that had burned like fire began to feel like warm water flowing through his thoughts, and the information that had overwhelmed him started to make sense, patterns emerging from the chaos like stars appearing in a night sky. He learned to see through the ship's sensors, to feel the earth above them and the rock below, to sense the electromagnetic fields that wrapped around the planet like invisible ribbons. He learned to control the ship systems with nothing but a thought, raising shields and powering weapons and calculating jumps through folded space, as easily as he had once steered his old pickup truck down dirt roads. And he learned about the galaxy, about the species that still survived and the threats they faced, and the desperate alliance that held together by nothing but hope and stubbornness. "There are 4 species left," Verath 7 explained one night as Marcus floated in the neural link. "The Vreth are insectoids who think as a hive, quick and precise and utterly logical, and they do not trust anyone outside their swarms." Marcus saw images of creatures like giant praying mantises with shells that gleamed like metal, their compound eyes cold and calculating. The Delaney are beings of water who evolved on a world covered entirely by ocean. They are philosophers and strategists, but they have forgotten how to hope. He saw flowing shapes that moved like living rivers, beautiful and sad, and he felt a strange connection to their despair, because he had known that feeling himself. The Korath are silicon-based life forms who live for thousands of years. They are the oldest surviving species, and they remember the architects with something like worship. Giants of living stone appeared in his mind, slow and ancient, and carrying the weight of eons on their shoulders. And then there are the Sethari, Verath 7 continued, energy beings who exist partly in normal space and partly in dimensions we cannot perceive. They are strange even by the standards of the galaxy, and nobody truly understands them. Marcus saw lights that moved and shifted and seemed to be looking back at him through the vision, and he shivered despite himself. "These 4 species have been fighting the Hollow alone for 500 years, the ship said. "They have been losing slowly, giving ground one system at a time, and they do not know that the contingency exists." "The contingency," Marcus repeated. "You mean humans." "I mean you," Verath 7 corrected. "You are the first human to pilot an architect vessel in 10,000 years, the first to carry their knowledge since the old worlds fell. And you must show the galaxy that the children of Earth are ready to fight." On the day that Marcus finally achieved full synchronization with the ship, something unexpected happened. Verath 7 went silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again her voice carried emotions that surprised them both. "I did not think you would survive," she admitted. "The architects believed humans would be strong, but I watched you suffer and struggle, and I thought your mind would break." "Why did you not tell me to stop?" Marcus asked. "Because you would not have listened," the ship replied. "And that stubbornness, that absolute refusal to accept defeat, that is exactly what the architects saw in your species all those years ago." Marcus felt something warm spread through the connection, something like pride and affection all mixed together. "They would have been proud of you," Verath 7 said quietly. "The architects, they would have looked at you and seen exactly what they hoped humanity would become." "I am just a farmer," Marcus said, the same words he had spoken on his first night aboard. "No," the ship disagreed. "You were a farmer, now you are something new, something the galaxy has never seen before, and it is time to show them what humans can do." Marcus took control of the ship's engines and felt power flowing through systems that had been dormant for millennia, and he lifted Verath 7 through the rock and soil above them with nothing but a thought. The barn exploded outward as they rose, and the night sky of Kansas stretched out above them, filled with more stars than Marcus had ever seen. "Where do we go?" he asked. "To the listening post of Kethenura," Verath 7 replied, "where the last alliance meets to discuss their desperate war, where the survivors of 1,000,000 dead worlds gather to pretend they still have hope." "They are not going to believe me," Marcus said as the ship rose higher and higher until the earth became a blue marble beneath them. "No," Verath 7 agreed. "They are not going to believe you, they are going to test you and doubt you and possibly try to kill you." Marcus smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "Let them try." The stars blurred around them as Verath 7 folded space for the first time in 10,000 years, and a human being left the solar system to meet the species that would decide the fate of everything. He was scared and he was alone, and he had no idea what he was doing. But he had stopped letting that stop him a long time ago. The listening post of Kethenura hung in the void between 3 dying stars, a massive station built from the wreckage of 100 lost civilizations. And when Marcus first saw it through the ship's sensors, he understood just how small humanity really was. Ships of every shape and size orbited the station like insects around a hive, vessels that ranged from tiny fighters to massive cruisers that could have held entire cities inside their hulls, and all of them carried the scars of endless war. "They have detected us," Verath 7 warned as alarms began to sound across the station. "They recognize my design, they know I am an architect ship, and they are very confused." Marcus watched as dozens of weapons locked onto his position, enough firepower to vaporize him 1,000 times over, and he forced himself to breathe slowly and stay calm. "This is the vessel," Verath 7 requesting permission to dock. He broadcast on all frequencies, using the knowledge the ship had given him. "I carry a message from the architects, and I seek an audience with the Alliance." The silence that followed seemed to last forever, and Marcus could feel the tension radiating from every ship around him, soldiers with their fingers on triggers waiting for the order to fire. Then a voice crackled through the communication system, harsh and clicking like stones grinding together. "There are no architects," the voice said. "They died 10,000 years ago. Who are you really, and how did you steal that ship?" "I am Marcus Cole of Earth," he replied. "I am the contingency." More silence, and then chaos erupted on every channel as species that had never heard of Earth demanded to know what was happening, and who this strange creature was that dared to speak the old words. "Bring him in," a different voice commanded, deep and slow like mountains moving. "If he is a liar we will know soon enough, and if he speaks truth then we must hear what he has to say." Marcus guided Verath 7 into the docking bay of the station, past rows of battle-scarred ships and teams of alien soldiers who watched him with weapons drawn. And when he stepped out of his vessel, he found himself surrounded by a nightmare of teeth and claws and cold alien eyes. A Vreth warrior approached him first, standing nearly 8 feet tall on legs that bent the wrong way, its compound eyes reflecting Marcus like 1,000 tiny mirrors. "You are soft," the Vreth said, its mandibles clicking with what might have been discussed. "You have no shell, no claws, no natural weapons at all. How can something like you pilot an architect's ship?" "I learned," Marcus said simply. The Vreth made a sound that might have been laughter, and behind it Marcus could see other species gathering. The flowing forms of the Delaney, and the massive stone bodies of the Korath, and lights that flickered at the edge of vision that must have been the Sethari. They took him to a great hall at the center of the station, a room that had been built for giants and made Marcus feel like an ant. And there, he faced the leaders of the last alliance. Admiral Skethrix of the Vreth stood at the center, all sharp angles and gleaming chitin, and beside her floated Tides of Sorrow of the Delaney, a being of blue water that moved like a living wave. Granite, who remembers, represented the Korath, an ancient creature of living stone whose eyes glowed with inner fire, and somewhere in the shadows above them, the Sethari observed without speaking. "You claim to be the contingency," Skethrix said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "The last hope the architects left behind before they died." "I do not claim anything," Marcus replied. "I am simply telling you what Vareth 7 told me." "And we should believe a ship that has been sleeping for 10,000 years," the Admiral demanded. "We should believe that some primitive species from an unknown world is the answer to our prayers." "I do not care what you believe," Marcus said, and his voice was steady even as his heart pounded in his chest. "I am here because the Hollow is coming for my world and I want to stop it." Tides of Sorrow moved closer, her form shifting and flowing as she studied him. "Your species is unknown to us," she said, and her voice was like water running over stones. "What makes you think you can fight an enemy that destroyed the architects themselves?" "Nothing," Marcus admitted. "We have no special weapons or advanced technology. We have only been in space for a few decades, and we do not even have ships that can travel between stars." "Then why should we waste our time with you?" Skethrix demanded. Marcus looked around the great hall at the gathered leaders of species that had been fighting and losing for 500 years, at warriors who had watched their worlds burn and their people die, and he told them the truth. "Because you are losing," he said. "Because every year the Hollow takes more territory and kills more of your people. Because you have tried everything you know how to try, and none of it has worked." The silence that followed was dangerous, and Marcus could see weapons being raised around the room, but he did not stop. "The architects did not choose my species because we were strong or smart or advanced," he continued. "They chose us because we do not know how to quit, because we have spent our entire existence fighting for survival against a planet that tried to kill us every single day." "Pretty words," Granite, who remembers, rumbled, "but words do not win wars." "No," Marcus agreed, "but stubbornness does, surviving one more day does, getting back up after you have been knocked down 1,000 times does, and that is what humans do better than anyone." He stepped forward, and the weapons tracked him, but he did not flinch. "I am not asking you to trust me," he said. "I am not asking you to believe in humanity. I am asking you to give us a chance to prove ourselves, because right now you do not have any other options." The leaders looked at each other, centuries of war and loss and desperation passing between them in that single moment, and finally Granite, who remembers, spoke. "The architects were wise," the ancient Korath said slowly, "wiser than any of us, and if they believed this species was worth saving, then perhaps we should listen." "Or perhaps they were wrong," Skethrix countered. "Perhaps they were desperate and made a mistake that we will all pay for." "Perhaps," Marcus said. "But there is only one way to find out." Tides of sorrow moved between the admiral and the human, her form rippling with colors that Marcus did not understand. "I have watched him since he arrived," she said. "I have studied his mind and his heart through the water that flows in his blood, and I sense something in him that I have not felt in a very long time." "What?" Skethrix demanded. "Hope," the Delaney said simply. "Not foolish optimism or empty faith, but real hope, the kind that survives when everything else has been stripped away." The vote was close, closer than Marcus ever knew, but in the end the Alliance agreed to give humanity a chance. They would send Marcus back to Earth with knowledge and technology, and a warning about what was coming, and they would wait to see if the contingency was real or just another false hope in a galaxy full of broken dreams. As Marcus walked back to his ship, the Vreth Admiral fell into step beside him. "I do not trust you," Skethrix said. "I do not believe your species can do what the architects hoped." "I know," Marcus replied. "But I hope I am wrong," the Admiral continued, "because if you fail, there will be nothing left to save." Marcus looked back at the Great Hall where the fate of the galaxy had been decided by a farmer from Kansas, and he smiled. "Then I guess I better not fail." Marcus returned to Earth not as a farmer but as a messenger carrying the weight of the stars on his shoulders, and when he revealed the truth to the world, everything changed forever. There was panic at first, riots in the streets and governments collapsing under the weight of revelation, because learning that humanity was not alone in the universe was one thing, but learning that an ancient enemy was coming to devour them all was something else entirely. But then something unexpected happened, something that proved the architects had been right all along. Humanity stopped fighting each other. It did not happen overnight and it was not perfect, but for the first time in history, the people of Earth looked up at the stars and saw a common enemy that made all their old conflicts seem meaningless. Nations that had been rivals for centuries began to share resources and technology. Scientists who had competed for funding now worked together in laboratories that spanned continents, and soldiers who had once pointed weapons at each other trained side by side for a war that would make everything they had ever fought about seem small. Marcus worked with the greatest minds on the planet to translate the knowledge Verath 7 carried, and within 5 years humanity had its first ship capable of traveling between stars. It was ugly and slow compared to what the Alliance could build, held together by determination and duct tape as much as by alien technology, but it was theirs and they were proud of it. More ships followed, each one better than the last, crewed by volunteers who knew they might never come home but signed up anyway because that was what humans did when their backs were against the wall. 20 years after Marcus had first touched the hull of Verath 7, the Earth Defense Fleet numbered 800 vessels of various sizes, a ragtag armada that the Alliance watched with a mixture of wonder and doubt. They learned fast, Tides of Sorrow admitted during one of her visits to the solar system, faster than any species we have ever seen. "They are desperate," Admiral Skethrix replied. "Desperation is a powerful teacher." "No," the Delaney disagreed. "It is more than desperation. They actually believe they can win." The Hollow arrived on a Tuesday, which Marcus always found strangely appropriate because nothing interesting ever happened on a Tuesday, except when the universe decided to end. The darkness emerged from fold space at the edge of the solar system, a mass of shadow and hunger that blotted out the stars behind it, and Marcus felt the cold touch of its presence even from millions of miles away. "All ships report ready," Commander Sarah Chen announced from the bridge of the flagship Defiance, a woman who had been 5 years old when Marcus first revealed the truth to the world, and who had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. "Earth Defense Fleet," Marcus said, his voice broadcast to every ship. "You know why we are here and you know what we face, and I am not going to lie to you and tell you this will be easy." 800 ships held formation against the darkness, each one crewed by men and women who had kissed their families goodbye knowing they might never see them again. The Hollow has destroyed civilizations that were ancient when our ancestors were still living in caves, Marcus continued. It has consumed species that we cannot even imagine, and by every logical measure we should not be here. The darkness began to move, splitting into thousands of smaller forms that raced toward the human fleet like wolves descending on prey. But we are here, Marcus said. And do you know why? Because 10,000 years ago someone looked at our ancestors and saw something special, something worth saving, and they believed in us before we even existed. He could feel the fear in the fleet, the trembling hands on controls and the prayers whispered in a dozen languages, and he let them feel it because fear was human, and there was no shame in being afraid. Today we find out if they were right, he finished. All ships engage. The Battle of Saul lasted 6 hours, and humanity lost half its fleet in the first wave alone. Ships torn apart by weapons that did not follow any laws of physics Marcus understood. Crews consumed by darkness that left nothing behind. But they did not break. Every time a ship fell, another took its place, and pilots who watched their friends die screamed in rage and flew straight into the teeth of the enemy. And when their weapons ran dry, they rammed their vessels into the Hollow and took as many of the monsters with them as they could. Marcus fought from the bridge of Varath 7, the old architect's ship dancing through the chaos like a leaf on the wind, and he felt every death through his connection to the fleet like wounds opening in his own flesh. "We cannot hold," Commander Chen reported, blood running down her face from a wound she had not noticed. "We are taking too many losses." "Then we hold anyway," Marcus replied. "That is what we do." And then when all seemed lost, the stars lit up with fold space signatures, and the Alliance arrived. Vreth warships emerged from nothing like metal insects swarming to defend their hive, and Delaney vessels flowed into formation with weapons that sang like waterfalls of light, and the great stone ships of the Korath advanced like mountains learning to fly. Admiral Skethrix's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "We did not believe," she admitted. "We watched from a distance and we doubted, but you held, you impossible stubborn creatures. You actually held." The combined fleet smashed into the Hollow from both sides, and for the first time in 500 years, the darkness was pushed back. The enemy retreated, not destroyed but wounded, driven away from Saul by an alliance that had finally remembered how to hope. In the aftermath, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Defiance surrounded by the survivors of the greatest battle humanity had ever fought, and Admiral Skethrix approached him with something like respect in her compound eyes. "Your species should not have survived that engagement," she said. Marcus looked out at the stars, at the distant spiral arm where the Hollow festered, at the fleet regrouping, at the fragile blue marble called Earth still turning peacefully below them. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we get that a lot." 50 years after the Battle of Saul, humanity stood at the heart of a reborn alliance. They had not defeated the Hollow because the darkness was too vast and too strange to ever truly destroy, but they had taught the galaxy how to fight it, how to endure, how to get back up after being knocked down. Marcus Cole was old now, his hair white and his bones tired from decades of war and diplomacy and hope, but he still flew Varath 7, and he still refused to quit. On the anniversary of first contact, he gave a speech to the combined fleet. Species from across the galaxy gathered to honor the farmer from Kansas who had changed everything. "The architects did not choose humanity because we were the strongest or the smartest," he said, his voice carrying across 1,000 ships. "They chose us because we were too stubborn to know when we were beaten." He looked out at the assembly, at Vreth and Delaney and Korath and humans standing together as allies and friends, and he smiled. "They chose us because when the universe told us to give up, we said no. When logic told us to surrender, we fought anyway. And when the darkness came, we lit a fire and refused to let it go out." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word from the man who had walked into a buried ship and walked out as humanity's first ambassador to the stars. "We are not special," Marcus continued. "We are just stubborn, but sometimes that is enough." He raised his hand to the stars above. "The hollow is still out there, still hungry, still waiting, and one day we will have to face it again. But when that day comes, we will be ready, because that is what humans do. We survive. We fight. We never give up." The fleet roared its approval. Thousands of voices from dozens of species joined together in a sound that echoed across the void. And Marcus Cole smiled and thought about a sinkhole in a Kansas barn, and a ship that had waited 10,000 years for someone stubborn enough to answer its call. The architects had believed in humanity before humanity believed in itself. And in the end, that faith had saved them all.